Welcome to the Glenn Beck program. I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano in for Glenn Beck. We've got a lot to do today, but as we do it, remember this, and they are the words of Thomas Jefferson. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. You know what's coming. Let's go.
Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna run around and desert you, never gonna make you cry, never gonna say goodbye, never gonna tell a lie and hurt you.
Hello, America. Today's show is about the loss of freedom, the loss of every person to make intelligent choices without guidance or interference or compulsion from the government. When this great country was founded, those who created the government understood that there are areas of personal choices that are none of the government's business. They fought a revolution. They wrote a constitution. They guaranteed that the government they gave us would be far different than the one they fought against. We are an independent country today, in large measure because the Founding Fathers had had enough of the British King and Parliament, telling them how to live, forcing them to sell goods where they didn't want to sell, taxing almost all their behavior, and disregarding their natural rights to speak, to engage in commercial activities of their own choosing, and to be left alone. Does that sound familiar? That was the complaint 230 years ago. It's happening all over again, except now it's our own government. The people we chose and we hired to work for us are trampling our liberties. Think about it. The air you breathe, the water you drink, the chair you're sitting in right now, the shower or the bath you took this morning, the TV you're looking at, even the shoes you are wearing, are all regulated by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. It's hard to find an area of human behavior that the feds don't regulate. And all their regulations have added to the size of government, increased taxes to the breaking point, and interfered with our personal choices in ways that those who created this great country could never have imagined. I'll give you a very recent example. Yesterday, a federal judge in California scolded the president and told him that he is subject to the same laws as the rest of us. That should not be news. But in the era of the nanny state, it is news. You see, the government thinks that so long as the majority rules, the majority is right. But that's not America. Sure, we have elections, and elections have consequences. But we also have rights, rights that come from God and not from the government. And the Constitution was written to assure that we could freely exercise those rights, free from the bad guys, free from the tyranny of the majority, and without the government on our backs. After months of protests, town hall meetings, and polls that showed a lot of Americans against so-called health care reform, the measure still passed. Just a couple little problems remain, though. Is it constitutional? And how will we pay for all of this? With us now is Dr. Rand Paul. He's running for the Senate on the Republican side in Kentucky. He's also an ophthalmologist. Betsy McCoy, she's a former lieutenant governor of the state of New York, a patients' rights advocate, and a constitutional scholar. And Fox Business Network's Charlie Gasparino, who's a force of nature on his own. Charlie, we'll start with you.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to the three of you to the Glenn Beck program. How are we going to pay for this? Where's the trillion going to come from?
Well, I mean, higher taxes. Some states benefit, some states don't. I mean, if you look at net, there's been some studies on this. I think the Heritage Foundation put together a good study. It looks like $11 billion in the hole for the states if you do a net basis, and it's going to come from taxes. And
it's coming from the lives of seniors.
Tell me what you mean by that.
This law is paid for in the first 10 years, in part with tax hikes, about $500 billion.
Right.
And also with a $500 billion reduction in future Medicare funding, just when 30% more people will be enrolled in Medicare when they turn 65. Those numbers do not add up. And already, if you look at a timeline...
What is it that you're holding here? What is this monstrosity?
This is the first third of this new law.
1/3 of
Yes.
the bill, of the law. It's about 8 or 9 inches thick.
That's right. But it's going to be defeated by this. The 18 pages of the Constitution, because this law is unconstitutional. But let's get back to seniors for a moment, because seniors and baby boomers are going to suffer the most. If you look at a timeline of how this act rolls out, in the first 2 years, there are cuts to Medicare dialysis, Medicare home care, Medicare hospice care, Medicare reimbursements to hospitals and nursing homes. The cuts are so severe, they're opening an express lane to the cemetery.
Dr. Paul, how can the medical profession tolerate these cuts, and who will be hurt the most by them?
Well, I think a lot of physicians are demoralized and disheartened. I think what will happen ultimately is they will lessen the amount of Medicare patients they see as the prices are cramped down and as there's a shortage of funds. And we are already seeing that. Popular family doctors are not taking new Medicare patients. There will be less care for people, and there will be shortages, and ultimately there won't be enough money, and so they'll have to ration the care for everyone.
You know, our colleague Britt Hume was kidding around, but I think somebody on the floor of the House actually said this. We'll just write a law that makes waiting lines illegal.
Right. But think about what you're saying. What you're really saying is that we are going to insure healthy 20-year-olds at the expense of the elderly.
Well, that's right. And Richard Foster, the chief actuary for Medicare, has warned in a December 13th letter that the cuts are so severe in what hospitals will be paid to take care of the elderly that some hospitals will simply stop taking Medicare. Where will seniors go when their local hospital doesn't get Medicare?
What burden, Charlie, will be imposed upon the states to make up for
Well, I mean, they're going to have to, I mean, that's the whole notion here. And let me tell you something. I've read some of this. I don't understand a lot of it. I don't think Congress understands what's going on here, because if you look at it, there's going to need to be higher taxes on everybody. In order to ensure, and this is the key thing, I think, from a moral issue, in order to ensure 20-year-olds who are very healthy, you have to cut services to the elderly. You have to.
Dr. Paul, you are a member of a medical organization, not the AMA, but another medical association that has filed a lawsuit against the Secretary of Health and Human Services alleging that this is unconstitutional. What do doctors, what do healthcare professionals say is wrong with this?
Well, this group is called AAPS, and it's the same group that sued Hillary Clinton in 1994. We took it all the way to the Supreme Court and won, so we have a good track record with this. But we're alleging that it violates the Fifth Amendment, that you can't take things from people without just compensation, and also that it violates the 10th Amendment, that these rights were not enumerated and given to the federal government, and they've traditionally been under the state governments. And I know you've also mentioned that it appears as if this is the federal government commandeering what functions have typically been left to the states. We think we have a good chance in court, and we will fight it. But, you know, we're also fighting it electorally. Right. There's going to be a big fight this November over this.
You and I talked on my radio show about this. I was in Florida last weekend with Glenn Beck, and a Florida legislator chatted with us and told us that the state of Florida now has to spend $1 billion more than it has. That's basically the Congress saying to Florida, raise your state taxes by $1 billion and spend it the way we tell you to. The legislator looked at me and said, I thought we were an independent legislature. I thought we could decide what taxes are and how we would spend the people's money.
Well, there's going to be great expenditures by state governments, but also by private industry. You know, AT&T talked about $1 billion more in expenditures. The bill also calls for 16,500 new IRS agents. So obviously someone's going to be collecting some new premiums.
The write-downs by the corporations.
Huge.
They're required to do that by the SEC, and the Congress is furious that this happens while the ink isn't even dry.
What's scary about this bill is the incredible amount of demagoguery that surrounds this thing. I mean, if you're not for it, you're a racist. If you're a corporation and you need to write down stuff, you get hauled before Congress because this is supposed to create savings. And I'll tell you, that's the scary thing if you think about it. In order to create the alleged $138 billion of savings over 10 years, by the way, $13 billion a year is not a lot of money in the context of our economy. You have to raise taxes dramatically, and you have to take massive write-downs if you're a company.
I want you to wear your political and your scholarly hat. You were the Attorney General of the state of New York. You are also a recognized scholar on the Constitution. Question, where is this more likely to die? In the federal court system, or by the people rising up and electing a different president in 3 years and a different Congress in 8 months, and the political system taking this away from us?
Well, it's likely that there will be a sufficient victory in the congressional races that will have majorities in Congress to defund this bill, not necessarily with a veto-proof majority to repeal it, but it's also highly likely that the High Court will reject substantial portions of this legislation. For example,
what parts will it reject?
Okay. On pages 148 and 49, this act, for the first time in history, says that the federal government can dictate how doctors treat private privately insured patients. So when you're in Aetna, Cigna, United Healthcare, any of those plans, the federal government can say to those doctors, you cannot participate in the private insurance system unless you do everything that the federal government says. It means they're going to be in the driver's seat for whether you get a stent or a bypass, whether you get a cesarean, whether your OBGYN orders a pap smear or a pelvic sonogram, literally everything in medical care.